McDonough was an aspiring young actress living in a fantasy world.
She wasn't really happy with her life, so she liked role-playing. She liked using this as a way to escape.
She found her leading man in accomplished stage actor Seth Mazzaglia.
Seth was one of the stars of the show. She, really looked up to him. There was instant lust for each other. They were very much in love.
And their romance was soon as daring and dramatic as any of the characters they played on stage.
They had a BDSM sex life. Seth was dominant, Kat was submissive. It was harsh, it was intense. They loved it.
But the lovers' kinky adventures would eventually take a dangerous turn.
He put the rope around her neck and choked her.
And once the twisted truth was unraveled, it would reveal a shocking tale of fetish, fixation, betrayal, and murder.
I loved him. I didn't want to lose him. This kind of individual has no conscience. He wanted to have sex with her, whether or not she's alive or dead.
Dover, New Hampshire, October 9th, 2012. It was a little after 11 p.m. at an apartment complex on the east side of town, when a car carrying a man and woman pulled into the parking lot. The couple jumped out and ran up to a second-floor apartment. Minutes earlier, they'd received an urgent phone call from a friend who lived at the apartment and was begging for help.
Her friend was distressed, crying, not telling why, but they had to come over right away.
The friend wouldn't reveal what the problem was over the phone. When the couple knocked at her door, their friend answered. They could see she was frantic. And when they walked into her apartment, they could see why.
As soon as they walked into the apartment, they saw a young woman lying on the floor with plastic bags on her head. She wasn't moving, so they immediately cut the bags off of her head, but it was too late because she was already dead.
It wasn't immediately clear who the girl was, but that was just one of several mysteries surrounding this gruesome discovery.
It was disturbing to just try to get your head around it and to ask yourself, how could this even happen? Exactly did she die?
The answers to those questions would uncover a twisted tale of bondage, domination, and obsession. Portsmouth, New Hampshire, a small coastal town located an hour north of Boston, Massachusetts, and the place where young Catherine McDonough grew up. Catherine, or Kat as her family called her, had an active imagination from a young age.
She liked pretending. She liked role-playing. She liked escaping into her own mind. She preferred the fantasy world to real life.
As a teenager, Kat found the best place to explore her imagination was as an actress in her high school drama productions, though her interest in the performing arts didn't make her the most popular girl in school. But that didn't bother Kat. She dreamed of pursuing an acting degree in college and worked after school at a local department store to save up for tuition.
She worked part-time while she was in school, so she had a little bit of extra income.
While Kat's parents were supportive of her dreams, they couldn't help but wish their daughter's feet were planted just a little more firmly on the ground. When she wasn't working or rehearsing for school plays, Kat spent almost all of her spare time in her room, role-playing as different personas in online fantasy video games.
She had a very unique lifestyle with the whole role-playing and the fantasy world that she was attracted to.
Kat was obsessed with online gaming and seemed to prefer the game world more than interacting with real people. As a result, her social life suffered, especially when it came to dating. At 17 and a senior in high school, Kat hadn't had much experience with boys, and up to this point, she didn't seem very interested in romance. But that all changed when she landed a role in a community theater stage production. The star of the play was an exciting, accomplished, and older actor who captivated Kat's attention from the moment she first laid eyes on him. 28-year-old Seth Mazzaglia.
He was one of the stars of the show. She was immediately taken with him, impressed with him. He was somebody who intrigued her.
Seth Mazzaglia was something of a big shot in Portsmouth's community theater scene. The 28-year-old thespian had a degree from the University of New Hampshire's well-respected theater program. He also had a black belt in karate, a skill he brought with him to the theater as a fight choreographer. And his natural charm and acting chops were the envy of all the wannabe leading men in the local theater community.
Seth was likable. He was charming. People looked up to him. He had carved out a reputation for himself within the local theater.
Even still, it was difficult to earn a living performing regional theater, so Seth worked several jobs to make ends meet.
He was working at Best Buy. He lived in a modest studio apartment. He was teaching children's karate on the weekends.
But once on stage and in the spotlight, there was no brighter star in Portsmouth than Seth Mazzaglia. And his reputation in the acting community certainly caught Kat McDonough's attention. Luckily for her, Seth also happened to share her love of role-playing and video games. The two quickly struck up a friendship and began playing together, often calling each other by the names of their game characters.
They would talk to each other in these different personas. Seth Mazzaglia was known as Dark Heart. She was Scarlet.
The thing that they had in common was the role-playing and the fantasy worlds and acting.
When they weren't playing games or rehearsing, Kat and Seth were constantly chatting on Facebook. Kat felt like she finally had a kindred spirit, and it didn't take long for their friendship to blossom into something more.
They connected very quickly. He was this older, dashing actor. She looked up to him. He swept her off her feet. He made her feel special. It was this fairy tale romance that fit into the fantasy life she had created for herself.
But soon after they began dating, Seth introduced Kat to a very different kind of role-playing, one involving bondage and domination.
50 Shades of Grey had recently come out. The BDSM lifestyle was becoming a lot more mainstream. Seth was what would be called the Dom, and Kat was the sub.
Kat was nervous at first, but quickly discovered she enjoyed the kinky lifestyle just as much as Seth did, and she got a rush out of letting him do whatever he wanted to her.
For the sub, there can be something really gratifying about completely letting go and letting someone else be totally in charge.
Catherine McDonough was exploring herself sexually for the first time. She thought this was liberating, exciting, something new to experience.
Kat and Seth's dominant and submissive relationship soon began to extend beyond the bedroom as well. Kat worshipped Seth and loved it whenever he would exert his power over her.
The theme of their relationship was pretty much what Seth wanted. Kat McDonough went along with.
In her mind, this was all just pretend. She was an actress. She enjoyed the role playing. This was just part of the relationship that they both enjoyed. This was normal for her.
Kat kept her relationship with Seth a secret from her friends and parents. But as soon as she graduated high school, she left home and moved into his apartment. When her parents learned of the relationship, they were shocked, to say the least.
Kat's parents were very upset that their 18-year-old daughter had moved out and was living with a man that was 10 years older than she was. But Kat didn't care. She had finally found someone that she felt understood her, showed attention to her, and she was willing to put her parents on the back burner to live with this man.
Once under the same roof, the couple took their kinky relationship to new heights. Kat was seemingly willing to do anything to please Seth. But that would turn out to be much more difficult than Kat had anticipated. Apparently, Seth was harboring other dark desires besides just pain and domination. And when finally unveiled, they would have repercussions beyond what anyone could possibly have imagined. Coming up, police in Dover, New Hampshire go on high alert when a young university student mysteriously goes missing.
You become concerned that someone's out there and might be doing something to her.
And the fear of foul play only grows when the investigation points to a surprising suspect.
They had worked together for a few weeks. It was a pretty new relationship. The two girls got along very well.
Kat McDonough and 28-year-old Seth Mazzaglia fell in love while rehearsing for a Shakespeare play in Dover, New Hampshire. Both aspiring actors, Kat and Seth shared a love of online video games and role-playing as their favorite characters.
The thing that they had in common was the role-playing and the fantasy worlds and going to the fairs and acting.
There was an instant lust for each other. They were connecting on a different level.
Despite their age difference, Kat and Seth also had an intense sexual connection. The lovers quickly discovered they shared a passion for another kind of role-playing as well, involving bondage and domination.
50 Shades of Grey had recently come out. The BDSM lifestyle was becoming a lot more known about in the mainstream.
The theme of their relationship was pretty much what Seth wanted, Kat McDonough went along with. He was the dominant, she was the submissive.
Her main focus was to please him. She just really fell in love with Seth.
But a series of bizarre and shocking events was about to peel back the veneer on this couple's kinky sexual adventures. It began on October 11th, 2012. When police in nearby Chester, New Hampshire, received a call from a distressed father who told them his daughter, 19-year-old Elizabeth Marriott, had gone missing.
Lizzie, as she was known to friends and family, was a student at the University of New Hampshire. She was studying marine biology. And to all her friends, she was a fun-loving girl who loved other people. She was living with her aunt and uncle in Chester so she could be closer to school.
Lizzie's father told police the last time anyone heard from his daughter was 2 nights earlier. She'd left a note saying that she planned to be home by midnight.
Lizzie had written on the bottom of the little grocery list or chore list, "I'm going to be staying at friends, I'll be home late," and then never showed up.
At first, her aunt and uncle didn't make too much of it. It was a house full of teenagers and young adults, and, they were always coming and going.
But Lizzie's father told police that Lizzie was in a long-term romantic relationship with another woman named Brittany Atwood. And yesterday, he received a call from Brittany telling him that Lizzie wasn't responding to her text or phone calls. She was worried something had happened to Lizzie.
Brittany was very alarmed because of the closeness of their relationship.
No one had seen Lizzie. No one knew where she was, and everybody became concerned.
When detectives contacted Brittany, she told them she and Lizzie had never gone more than a few hours without talking. She said they were in a very serious and stable relationship, and when they weren't together, they were constantly calling or texting one another.
The fact that Lizzie hadn't talked to Brittany was a major sign that something was wrong, because those two women, even though they lived in separate states, were virtually inseparable.
Brittany told police that the night Lizzie went missing, she said she had plans to hang out with a new friend from work, a young woman named Kat McDonough.
Elizabeth Marriott was working at a store with Catherine McDonough when they met. They had worked together for a few weeks. It was a pretty new relationship as well, but the two girls got along very well.
Brittany said the last time she'd spoken with Lizzie was around 9 p.m., as she was leaving school to drive over to Kat's apartment. The plan was to hang out with Kat and her boyfriend, Seth. Police obtained contact information for Lizzie's coworker, Kat McDonough, through the store where they both worked, and stopped by Kat's apartment to see what she and Lizzie had been up to on the night Lizzie disappeared. Kat told investigators that she'd asked Lizzie to come over because she and Lizzie were both fascinated by the paranormal. And and they made plans that night to take pictures at a nearby cemetery.
Kat McDonough had invited Lizzie to go out into one of the local cemeteries in Portsmouth and take photos of ghosts.
But Kat told detectives that Lizzie had never actually shown up that night.
When police asked Catherine if she had had any interaction with Lizzie Marriott, she said that Lizzie had never arrived at the apartment.
Kat said she assumed Lizzie stood her up, so she went and shot the photographs at the cemetery by herself instead. Kat's live-in boyfriend, Seth Mazzaglia, said he hadn't seen Lizzie that night either. He'd gone out around 9 p.m., and when he returned at 10 p.m., Lizzie still hadn't arrived.
At the time that Lizzie Marriott was supposed to be coming over to take the tour of the cemetery, told police he'd gone out for a jog and was gone for a fairly lengthy period of time.
Kat and Seth said they figured Lizzie had driven home instead. To police, Kat and Seth seemed clear on the events of that evening and eager to help police locate Lizzie. The detectives thanked the couple for their cooperation and continued with their investigation. With no obvious clues as to what happened to Lizzie, police issued a statewide alert for the missing college student. Later that day, detectives received word that the University of New Hampshire police had found Lizzie's abandoned car in a parking lot on campus, but the vehicle contained no evidence of her whereabouts.
They found nothing to make them believe that anything unusual had occurred in that vehicle.
With no obvious clues as to what happened to Lizzie, police issued a statewide alert for the missing college student, while her parents put together a reward for any information on what might have happened to their daughter.
All of New Hampshire was on high alert looking for this missing University of New Hampshire student.
People were hoping, obviously, that she was going to be found alive. But the longer that she was gone, you become concerned that someone's out there and might be doing something to her.
While the public at large kept their eyes peeled for any sign of the missing college student, detectives began retracing Lizzie's steps the night she disappeared. The goal was to uncover some clues from that evening that might reveal what happened to her. And in reliving Lizzie's last known activities on October 9th, one event stood out as particularly suspicious to investigators. Lizzie's mysterious no-show at Kat McDonough and Seth Mazzaglia's apartment. Something about the couple's story just hadn't sat right with detectives.
Kat was supposed to be meeting Lizzie to take pictures at the cemetery, but she never showed up. So Kat went by herself.
When police checked the phone records of Lizzie, they found that there was not a single phone call at that time from Kat to Lizzie.
Investigators wondered, why hadn't Kat called Lizzie when she didn't show up?
She said Lizzie didn't show up, and she just didn't contact her. That's not what people would do. They'd call and say, hey, where are you? Oh, you're running a little late? They don't just leave.
Detectives decided it was time to pay Kat McDonough and Seth Mazzaglia another visit. But little did they know that a second, more thorough look at the couple would reveal far more than anyone realized. Coming up, as detectives question Kat and Seth, their stories begin to change.
When Seth started to go off the playbook, Catherine got nervous.
And a shocking revelation uncovers the dark depths of this couple's relationship.
Seth Mazzaglia kept on saying, I went too far, I don't know what happened, I went too far.
Kat McDonough and Seth Mazzaglia were two aspiring actors who shared a passion for more than just the stage. Together, they were exploring the salacious sex life of bondage and domination, with Kat playing the role of Seth's submissive slave. But the sudden disappearance of one of Kat's co-workers, a young college student named Lizzie Marriott, had led New Hampshire police to the couple's doorstep.
Lizzie Marriott was invited to Seth and Catherine's place on October 2nd.
When Dover police first questioned Kat and Seth about Lizzie's disappearance, The couple told them they were expecting Lizzie to come over to their apartment after class, but she never arrived. But something about their story didn't add up to detectives.
Lizzie's phone records showed a number of phone calls to her girlfriend, Brittany. There wasn't a single phone call from Kat.
Kat said Lizzie didn't show up, and she just didn't contact her. That's not what people would do. They'd call and say, hey, where are you?
Police decided it was time to talk to Kat and Seth again. This time, detectives asked the couple to come down to the station and separated them for their interviews. When asked to recount her activities on the night Lizzie disappeared, Kat repeated her story, that she'd waited for her friend and then went alone to the cemetery to take photographs. Detectives asked Kat if she could verify her story by showing them the photographs she said she took that evening. But Kat said she couldn't.
She had this whole story about how she took pictures, but then she deleted them all. That just happens to be why she doesn't have any pictures to prove that she was taking pictures of the cemetery.
Meanwhile, Seth repeated his story. He'd gone for a 2-mile run around 9 p.m. that evening and returned home at 10 p.m. But when officers asked him to explain why it had taken him an hour to run just 2 miles, Seth seemed flustered.
Anyone can walk 2 miles in less than an hour. I'm not really the world's fastest jogger, but I'd be back in a whole lot less than an hour.
With Seth's alibi seeming to unravel, investigators decided to turn up the heat on the 28-year-old, and it wasn't long before he started to crack under the pressure.
Seth started with that story, but got a little bit flubbed up, and he started to diverge in a couple of different directions.
Seth finally admitted that Lizzie had actually shown up at the apartment that night. It wasn't for the purpose of taking pictures at the graveyard, as Kat had said previously. She'd actually come over, as Seth said, to join in a threesome between Lizzie, Kat, and Seth.
Seth told investigators that he and Kat had recently been looking for new ways to take their kinky relationship to new heights. Kat had always been willing to do anything to please Seth, so she was more than eager to listen when he told her he wanted to find another woman to join in their sex games.
Seth told her that he had a fantasy to bring other women into their relationship, other women to play the role as his sex slaves.
To Seth's surprise, Kat hadn't needed much convincing. She'd confessed she'd always felt an attraction to girls, as well as guys, and since Seth had made all of her dreams come true, she wanted to return the favor.
Kat was bisexual. She can have another play partner, and Seth would certainly receive gratification from 2 women doing basically whatever he wants.
Seth told investigators that he and Kat looked for weeks to find another woman to join them in the bedroom.
He would post online on different websites like FetLife looking for submissives and slaves, and he had specific criteria for these girls.
Despite their efforts, though, the couple's search hadn't found any potential candidates. But Seth said that changed when Kat became friends with her co-worker, Lizzie Marriott. Seth claimed that Lizzie was intrigued with the stories Kat had told her about the couple's kinky lifestyle, and, at least according to Seth, seemed open to the idea of a threesome.
Lizzie was gay. She was in a relationship with a woman. And I think that Seth kind of wanted to see something going on between Kat and Lizzie.
Seth told detectives that the couple decided to see how open Lizzie was in joining their sex games on the night Kat invited her over to the couple's apartment. After a movie, Seth suggested they all play a friendly game of strip poker.
His idea was, we'll try playing a little strip poker, which will be, sexy and kind of moving things in that direction, and then just sort of fall into doing this kinky threesome with us. It'll be great.
Seth said one thing led to another, and before he knew it, Kat and Lizzie were having sex, and he was watching.
But Seth wasn't content to just watch. He wanted to join in, and he decided to see if Lizzie would be willing to try one of the couple's more intense bondage techniques that Kat was especially fond of: erotic asphyxiation, or breath play, where Kat would let Seth choke her during sex, cutting off her oxygen to enhance her orgasms.
Seth's story that it was some erotic asphyxiation breath play going on, providing some kind of pleasure for her as she on and off couldn't breathe.
But Seth told police that something went wrong when he tightened the rope around Lizzie's neck, and she started convulsing. Seth claimed he and Kat tried to revive Lizzie, but it was too late.
According to Seth, Lizzie's death was accidental. He was doing some breath play with her, and she accidentally died.
But even though Seth claimed Lizzie's death had been an accident, he said he and Kat panicked once they realized what had happened.
Seth stated that they were concerned that no one would believe that it was an accident that caused Lizzie's death, so they needed to get rid of the body.
Seth told detectives that the couple put Lizzie's body in a suitcase and then loaded it into the back of Lizzie's SUV. At Kat's suggestion, the couple then drove to nearby Pierce Island, where they dumped Lizzie's body into the turbulent water that surrounded the cliffs. Seth said he and Kat then drove Lizzie's car back toward town, getting rid of evidence along the way.
They drove Lizzie Marriott's vehicle back to the University of New Hampshire, stopping at a few dumpsters to get rid of articles of clothing.
Seth and Kat brought Lizzie's car to the University of New Hampshire, parked it in a parking lot that they thought would be a believable place for her to have last been. They walked then from there all the way back to their apartment.
It was a shocking turn of events, and when investigators confronted Kat with Seth's confession, she changed her story as well, confirming that Lizzie had accidentally suffocated during sex. But Kat insisted the accident hadn't been Seth's fault, but her own.
She explained to them that she was actually on top of Lizzie Marriott when she passed away.
She was sitting on Lizzie Marriott's face, and Lizzie couldn't breathe.
Detectives were now faced with two conflicting confessions. The problem was, which one was right? To investigators, Seth's version contained details that were difficult to believe.
The way that he describes that she died, where suddenly she was like convulsing and it was like she has a seizure, that's not usually the way a death from asphyxiation would happen.
But to police, Kat's story seemed even more far-fetched.
When a person begins to suffocate, they're going to fight for air. If Kat had really sat on Lizzie's face and she was suffocated, the natural tendency for her would be to start fighting frantically to get her off of her. She would have been doing something that probably would have caused bruises on Kat's legs. There were no bruises on any parts of Kat's body.
To investigators, it was much more likely that Kat's story was simply a poor attempt to protect her boyfriend. And given that Seth had admitted to tightening a rope around Lizzie's neck when she died, police arrested him on suspicion of murder.
The conversation that Seth Mazzaglia had with police gave police enough information that they could get an arrest warrant for Seth Mazzaglia and put him in jail.
While Seth was locked up, Kat was released without charges as detectives continued their investigation. But many couldn't help but wonder, was one of Lizzie Marriott's killers getting off scot-free? Coming up, a new eyewitness comes forward with information that changes everything the police thought they knew about the night Lizzie Marriott died.
She told Seth that he had two options, to call for help or to take care of this himself.
And a killer's deadly plan is unveiled.
He wanted to have sex with her, whether or not she's alive or dead.
When 18-year-old actress Kat McDonough landed a role in a local play with charismatic older actor Seth Mazzaglia, she thought all of her fantasies had come true. Not only did Seth share Kat's passion for fantasy role-playing, he introduced her to an erotic world of bondage and domination.
She ended up really engulfing that whole lifestyle. As a teenager, you're just starting to experiment sexually, and she just really fell in love with Seth.
But the investigation into the disappearance of Kat's coworker, Lizzie Marriott, revealed that Seth and Kat had taken their sex games too far, resulting in what they both claimed had been Lizzie's unexpected death.
According to Seth, Lizzie's death was accidental. He was doing some breath play with her, and she accidentally died.
But the couple both admitted they had tried to cover up the incident, which led police to arrest Seth on suspicion of murder, while Kat was released as detectives continued their investigation. One day following his arrest, Seth agreed to take detectives to the spot on Pierce Island, where he claimed he and Kat had dumped Lizzie's body. Divers searched the water surrounding the area for hours, but Lizzie's remains were never found.
The Piscataqua River is one of the strongest currents in the United States. It's not unusual when something goes into the river that it disappears.
Police were, however, able to recover some of Lizzie's personal items that Seth had admitted he and Kat tossed into garbage dumpsters on the night of her death.
Police were able to find a condom, a pair of gloves, and part of Lizzie's clothing.
Investigators sent the evidence off for testing, but without a body, they knew it was going to be difficult to prove Lizzie's death had been anything other than an accident. But police would soon find the information they were searching for when taking a closer look at Seth and Kat's phone records. Shortly before 11 p.m. on October 9th, 3 calls had been placed from Seth's phone to a local woman named Roberta Gherkin.
Roberta Gherkin was his tarot card reader. So she was offering advice to him about a variety of different things. She was more of a trusted friend.
When police contacted Roberta, she told them she had been watching television with her boyfriend on the night Seth called. When she answered, she was surprised to find it wasn't Seth, but Kat McDonough on the phone.
She sounds extremely upset, so Roberta immediately got up and went to her apartment, as she had asked.
Roberta said as soon as they arrived, she realized something terrible had happened.
Roberta said that when they walked into the apartment, they found a young woman lying on the floor, plastic bags on her head, and she was obviously dead.
Seth Mazzaglia kept on saying, I went too far. I don't know what happened. I went too far.
Roberta said that Seth begged her to help get rid of the body, but the most she would agree to was not to tell anyone what they'd seen.
Roberta and the boyfriend had said, you need to call the authorities. We can't be here because we can't be a part of this.
Detectives were immediately alarmed by Roberta's story. Neither Seth nor Kat had mentioned anything about plastic bags when describing Lizzie's death. When the lovers were confronted with Roberta's testimony, Seth stuck by his story. But this time, it was Kat who cracked under pressure. With tears in her eyes, she confessed that Lizzie's death hadn't been an accident. According to Kat, the events that led up to Lizzie's killing began when she first started dating Seth. At first, she'd been turned on by his kinky lifestyle. But after she moved in with him, his desires grew even more dark and dominating.
At first, Catherine felt like this was going to be a very liberating experience, but he wanted more and more control of her sexually. It was no longer a mutually gratifying situation for her.
She was more even used as a slave rather than just a submissive.
But Kat claimed Seth soon wasn't satisfied with only dominating her. He became obsessed with the idea of having multiple submissive sex partners, and soon ordered her to help him recruit young women that he could keep as sex slaves.
He wanted to have all his little women slaves around him, and he was going to do exactly what he wanted to them.
According to Kat, when Seth first met Lizzie Marriott, he decided she was the perfect candidate.
The fact that Lizzie was openly in a gay relationship, he was turned on by what he saw between Kat and Lizzie. They were flirting with each other. And those things kind of made her an easy target.
Kat said Seth planned to seduce Lizzie the night she came over to their apartment and gave Kat specific instructions on what to do to convince her friend to join them in the bedroom.
Seth sat down with Catherine and told her what she needed to do. She was to flirt more. She was to suggest play a game of strip poker, things of that nature, which might excite Lizzie Marriott and then get her involved in their BDSM lifestyle.
Kat said at first the evening was going exactly as Seth had planned. After a few hands of strip poker, she and Lizzie were both down to their underwear. But when Seth suggested the two girls make out, Lizzie refused.
That is really just like a blow to his ego, which is very fragile. This is a guy who uses power and control to try to get people to do what he wants them to do.
But Kat said Seth was undeterred, and next asked Lizzie to just watch while he and Kat had sex.
That's where Lizzie stopped the train and said, no, I'm sorry, I love my girlfriend and I'm in a relationship and I can't do that. I think that's really when he lost it.
He was used to having Kat say yes. Yes and yes. That was even more jolting to him because it was not his experience or his expectation.
Kat said that's when Lizzie began putting her clothes back on to leave the apartment. And as Lizzie got dressed, Seth went to the bedroom and came back holding one of their bondage ropes.
He took a rope from the box of sex toys that they kept near the bed and put the rope around Lizzie Marriott's neck and choked her.
Kat told police that Lizzie fought back as Seth tightened the rope around her neck.
She never saw her attacker coming, as she never had the chance to defend herself.
But Kat said the worst was still to come. Once Lizzie was dead, Seth told her to go and close the blinds. When she came back, she was horrified to find him in the middle of having sex with Lizzie's dead body.
He wanted to have sex with her, whether or not she's alive or dead.
The kind of individual that would have sex with a woman they just murdered is someone who has no conscience.
Once Seth was finished, Kat said he told her they had to get rid of the body. Afraid Seth might kill her too if she refused, she agreed to go along with the plan.
At that point in time, Seth suggested to her that she call Roberta Gherkin. He also suggested to her that she find some grocery bags to put over Elizabeth Marriott's head, so when Roberta got there, she wouldn't see Marriott's face.
Based on Kat's confession, police placed her under arrest and increased Seth Mazzaglia's charges from second to first-degree murder. Coming up, facing life in prison, Kat McDonough considers a deal with prosecutors. But will a lack of evidence get Seth Mazzaglia off the hook for murder?
You cannot recreate what happened that night. Nobody can. So, from a defense standpoint, that person cannot be convicted.
In October of 2012, the kinky sex games of Kat McDonough and Seth Mazzaglia had spiraled out of control, and their dark BDSM lifestyle had led to the murder of Kat's coworker, 19-year-old Lizzie Marriott.
Seth Mazzaglia strangled Lizzie Marriott from behind. He laid her limp body on the floor and then raped her.
Now the couple's fantasy world was over. Seth was about to stand trial for first-degree murder, while Kat was facing charges for helping cover up the crime. But with no body and a limited amount of physical evidence, prosecutors knew they were going to need Kat's testimony to convict Seth Mazzaglia.
She was able to receive a plea deal from the Attorney General's office. Kat McDonough will only serve 1.5 to 3 years in jail for her involvement in Lizzie Marriott's death.
On May 27, 2014, Seth Mazzaglia stood trial for the murder of Lizzie Marriott. From the witness stand, Kat testified that Seth became physically abusive over the course of their relationship, and she was soon afraid that he would kill her if she didn't do everything he wanted.
I didn't have anywhere I could go. And I left him. I didn't want to lose him.
Which is why, Kat claimed, she didn't have a choice when Seth told her he wanted her to seduce Lizzie Marriott for him to use as a sex slave.
Seth suggested a couple different things, like watching a movie or playing Dungeons and Dragons, and he had asked me to mention strip poker.
It was kind of like Stockholm Syndrome. I really don't think that she had a choice. I think he completely had her under his thumb and would not let her go.
But Seth's defense painted a very different picture of the couple's relationship. They claimed Kat was a willing and equal participant in Lizzie's murder, and that her emotional testimony on the stand was just the work of a very talented young actress.
At one point, she was accused of having crocodile tears by the defense team because the suggestion was that there was no moisture coming out of her eyes.
It was beginning to seem like Kat McDonough and not Seth Mazzaglia was on trial, but Seth's defense team wasn't done. They argued Kat's claim that Seth had raped Lizzie's body was a lie, as proven by lab tests on the condom the couple had thrown in the dumpster on the night of the murder.
The condom police found in the dumpster did not have Lizzie's DNA. It only had the DNA of Seth and Kat.
But the prosecution was also armed with DNA evidence, and tests on the underwear Seth had been wearing that night proved he had violated Lizzie's corpse just as Kat claimed.
Seth Mazzaglia had DNA evidence from Lizzie Marriott inside his underwear. He apparently was not using protection at the time of the rape.
It was strong enough evidence to convince a jury, and on August 14, 2014, Seth Mazzaglia was convicted of the first-degree murder of Lizzie Marriott.
Guilty is the verdict of purposeful first-degree murder by strangulation.
Seth Mazzaglia was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole.
As per the terms of her plea deal, Kat McDonough began her 36-month sentence for conspiracy and evidence tampering on July 25, 2013.
The relationship between Seth and Kat was doomed from the beginning. It had a premature end because of the end of Lizzie's life. Finally, Seth had gone too far.
Kimberly Mashad was a lonely housewife, trapped in an unhappy marriage.
I didn't want to hurt his feelings, but the love wasn't there.
Jimmy Kelly was a recently released ex-con, haunted by his troubled past.
He was charged with a vehicular manslaughter.
When these two lost souls became neighbors, their appetite for affection led them down an adulterous path.
Eventually, it becomes physical.
They were crazy for each other.
But the sex and deceit would soon lead to something much more scandalous and deadly than an illicit affair.
People were more or less executed.
Now, get an inside look at this harrowing tale of treachery and greed.
This is the first time I've ever spoken of it or talked about it with anybody.
And learn how lust and obsession can become a roadmap for not one, but 3 cold-blooded murders.
Drugs, money, lust, that can cause anything.
This would be with me for the rest of my life. I still have nightmares of it.
January 26, 2004, Yucca Valley, California. At around 10:30 p.m., San Bernardino Sheriff's deputies pulled up outside a quiet house on Joshua View Drive. A friend of the homeowner hadn't heard from her in a while and had called law enforcement to do a welfare check. At first, the deputies suspected the homeowner simply wasn't home, a hunch that seemed to be confirmed when no one answered the door. But when the deputies peered through the home's window, they discovered a dreadful scene.
To the right of the doorway were 2 gentlemen that were laying down on the floor. There was a lot of blood.
The deputies immediately broke down the door. A closer look at the 2 men on the floor revealed they were both dead.
We have people who were shot multiple times at close range.
While one deputy radioed for backup, the other crept further into the darkness. At the end of the hallway, he found the body of a dead woman.
The woman victim had been shot multiple times, and she actually had a cord wrapped around her neck.
These people were more or less executed.
But who were the victims? And who was responsible for this gruesome scene? The answers to those questions would eventually unveil a story that would come to haunt these officers for years, and leave everyone in this small California town wondering what was more shocking, the brutality of the crimes themselves, or the twisted romance behind it all.
He would do anything for her, including kill, as he was completely madly in love with her. It was a fatal attraction.
Ypsilanti, Michigan, a quiet town 30 miles outside of Detroit. Ypsilanti was also where Kimberly Michaud called home. Born in 1972 and raised in a working-class household, Kimberly's home life was rough from the beginning.
My dad was an alcoholic, abusive toward my mom. I'm the youngest of 5 kids, so the other kids were pretty much doing their own thing, so I just stayed to myself.
Kimberly's childhood might have started out lonely, but by the time she was a teenager, her raven hair and dark eyes gave her the looks to turn the heads of plenty of boys.
She had a really baby face. She was young, vivacious.
She always wanted to be noticed, and she was good at getting what she wanted.
Kimberly dated a steady stream of boys through her teens and early 20s. But while none of Kimberly's flings were built for the long haul, several had resulted in unexpected pregnancies. And by the time she was 29, Kimberly was the mother of 4 children by 3 different fathers.
I never intended on several dads. I was a single parent trying to work 3 jobs. It's hard.
But Kimberly wasn't just overwhelmed. She was lonely. She craved the comfort and stability of a committed relationship. But Kimberly's luck with love seemed to finally take a turn for the better when she met a kind, older man named Joe Michaud. Joe was caring, attentive, and sincere in a way she never experienced.
Joe was older, much older, and more of a father figure to her, so she latched onto him more for stability.
Joe was also a retired veteran, which provided a steady income stream that he used to support Kimberly and her kids.
The bond was between me seeing him interact with my children. When I see my kids happy, that's what makes me happy.
Which is why she didn't hesitate to say yes when Joe surprised Kimberly by proposing just a few months after they met.
He is her savior. He's gonna look after her and take care of these kids and make sure everything's okay.
Not long after the wedding, Joe decided to move Kimberly and her kids to California, where he had family and several job prospects. The family settled into a nice neighborhood in Yucca Valley, a small town about an hour north of Palm Springs. But it wasn't long after she moved to Yucca Valley that Kimberly came to realize an unavoidable truth about her marriage. Just 3 years after saying, "I do," the spark she once felt with Joe had faded.
Kimberly's main attraction to Joseph is based off of neediness. And, within their marriage and within their relationship, there wasn't a strong physical component.
There was an attraction for him towards me, but it wasn't mutual. I didn't want to hurt his feelings. I mean, I cared, but the love wasn't there.
Kimberly grew lonely, and her unhappiness put a huge strain on her marriage. To make matters worse, she didn't have any friends in Yucca Valley to talk with about her problems. But that all changed in the summer of 2003, when Kimberly finally laid eyes on a friendly and striking face who was not only willing to listen to her. His name? Jimmy Kelly. A ruggedly handsome 35-year-old who just moved in next door. Born in 1968, Jimmy Kelly grew up in Yucca Valley. And like Kimberly, he also had a rough start in life.
His mother raised him alone. His dad was in the Aryan Brotherhood. Went to prison, in and out of prisons. He went and seen his dad on the weekends.
As a teenager, Jimmy followed in his father's rowdy footsteps. He loved having a good time, even if it meant getting into trouble. And that's exactly what Jimmy and his pals were doing one November night in 1986, just 5 months after Jimmy's 18th birthday.
They were playing a game where they drive through intersections at a fast rate of speed and they turn their headlights off. It's almost like a game of chicken.
But when Jimmy's car veered into the path of an unsuspecting motorist, his game of chicken took a tragic turn.
Another car had come through the intersection in a cross manner, and he broadsided the car.
A 7-year-old child was killed.
Jimmy, who was drunk at the time of the accident, was arrested and charged with vehicular manslaughter. And even though he was barely 18, the judge showed him no mercy and sentenced Jimmy to prison.
He was booked into the jail and went through the adult system.
To say that life behind bars was a formative experience for the teenager was an understatement.
Prison is a scary place for anybody, let alone an 18-year-old kid.
Prison certainly toughened Jimmy up, but upon his release, the now 34-year-old was eager to soften his hardened edge and attempt to lead a conventional and law-abiding life. While he saved up for his own place, Jimmy moved in with his mother in Yucca Valley. The quiet suburb was a welcome change from the violent prison world Jimmy had just left, full of tidy homes and friendly, well-meaning neighbors. Neighbors like Kimberly Mashad.
I remember like it was yesterday. I was with my kids, with my daughter and my 2 youngest, and I seen Jim across the street, and Jim came over and introduced himself.
From the moment they first met, it was clear the chemistry between them was palpable. Tall, dark, and handsome, Jimmy immediately caught Kimberly's attention. While Jimmy couldn't help it, the more time he spent with Kimberly, the more he coveted her. And it wasn't long before the couple could no longer deny their building lust and desires.
They're starting to talk about their hopes and their dreams about life. And eventually, it becomes physical.
She was infatuated with Jimmy, and here she had this exciting young man who was just willing to do anything for her, and so she went along with it completely.
With Jimmy, Kimberly felt a passion and yearning she'd never felt for her husband. While Jimmy realized that as his attraction to Kimberly grew, so too did his desire to rescue her from her troubled marriage. Especially not only unhappy, but abusive.
Joseph started hitting me. He became a violent man. Jim said that I didn't deserve that and that I should get out of it, and I told him I couldn't. I had no place to go, nothing.
Kimberly is looking for a rescuer, and Jimmy, in his search for some positivity in his life, is more than happy to step in.
And even though his affair with Kimberly was less than a month old, Jimmy decided to confront Joe with the intention of doing just that.
He walked into the house, pointed a gun at Joe, and said, "Get out. Your wife is now mine."
He did tell Joe that he was going to raise the kids and I was his wife.
To Joe, standing up to a violent ex-con like Jimmy seemed like a bad idea. So he followed Jimmy's orders and moved out of the house and into a nearby apartment, which made way for Jimmy to move in.
Jimmy essentially just muscled his way into her house and just muscling her husband out of the picture and kind of just took her as his own.
No longer confined by having to sneak around, the couple's romance grew even more intense.
They were crazy for each other.
They'd have sex all the time and just start becoming more intoxicated by love.
But little did Kimberly and Jimmy then know that their fiery love affair was about to be extinguished by a chilling discovery made in a quiet house on the other side of town. Coming up, riding high on their all-consuming romance, Kimberly told detectives that even though she requested the welfare check, she and her sister had actually seen and visited with Patty a few hours earlier that afternoon.
They had gone to Patty Crevassier's house earlier in the day on the 26th, and they were helping her move some personal items, some furniture.
But according to the friend, she and her sister weren't there. Had also been two handymen at the home. The same two men who are now dead inside Patty's house. 37-year-old Ward Phillips and 43-year-old William Landers.
Well, they were there doing some work on the house, putting in carpet.
They saw Ward and William installing the carpet, met them, said hello, and went ahead and helped Patty carry some boxes to the back room.
According to the friend, all was well inside the house when she and her sister left later that afternoon. But a series of strange circumstances had occurred later that evening that led them to be concerned for Patty's well-being. And those circumstances began when the friend said she and her sister returned later that night to see if Patty needed any more help. Only when they came back, they could tell something was amiss.
They knocked on the door, and nobody answered the door, but they heard some hush sounds, like somebody were trying to whisper. And so they knocked harder on the door.
At that point, the hushed voice became loud enough for them to hear.
A woman's voice came through the door and said something to the effect, "Hey, Patty said go away, come back later."
Thinking it was odd, the friend said she peeked in through the front window, where she saw something that didn't seem right.
She could see that Ward was laying on the ground. She knew Ward.
According to the friend, Ward had been lying there motionless, but she hadn't seen any blood.
She didn't know if he was sleeping or what was going on.
To police, the fact that Patty's friend hadn't seen any blood pool around Ward's body most likely indicated that the woman and her sister had stopped by Patty's at the same time.
Unbeknownst to them, apparently, they had come over right when this crime was happening.
If that was the case, it made what Patty's friend revealed next even more important. According to the friend, when she and her sister arrived at Patty's house that evening, they noticed a strange vehicle parked in Patty's driveway, a dark-colored Chevy Silverado pickup truck.
She knew this truck didn't belong to Patty, and it hadn't been there earlier in the day.
Which led the women to believe that the truck didn't belong to the two carpet layers either, especially since the truck had out-of-state license tags.
The vehicle had Michigan license plates.
To investigators, it was a surprising story filled with unexpected revelations, not the least of which was the bombshell that this small house on a quiet street had been the base of operations for a major drug dealer. Detectives decided to check with some of their undercover informants to see if anyone within the local narcotics world might want Patty Crevassier dead. And in every conversation, one name kept popping up: 37-year-old Mark Jenkins, a violent biker gang member that informants insisted shouldn't be overlooked as a suspect.
He went by the name Motorhead. He was tied up in the drug community very deeply, in and out of prison.
They said, "You need to look at this guy. This guy's a hothead. He's got a really bad temper."
A bad temper. And according to informants, a major beef with Patty Crevassier.
He had a girlfriend who was at least acquaintances with Patty. Patty and her got into a physical altercation.
And we had people tell us if anybody was going to do something to Patty, it would have been Mark.
If Mark Jenkins really had targeted Patty, that meant Ward Phillips and William Landers most likely had been innocent victims caught in the crossfire. Working off tips, investigators immediately put out an APB for the hot-headed biker. But just as they became convinced they were on the cusp of catching their killer, new evidence would emerge that would connect back to two of Patty's other drug clients and turn everything police thought they knew about the triple slang on Joshua View Road upside down. Coming up, investigators confront a suspected killer.
He, in fact, made statements that he was going to get back at her or that he was going to get her.
The wrong suspect. When a surprising phone call points detectives toward a couple no one expected.
He can tell instantly that something is wrong with her and that she has a secret that she's keeping.
I wasn't sure what to expect, what to think, and I was frantic.
Within weeks of first meeting, 29-year-old mother of four Kimberly Mashad and 35-year-old ex-con Jimmy Kelly had gone from friendly neighbors to impassioned lovers. Jimmy had kicked Kimberly's husband Joe out of the couple's home and taken over as head of the household. And once together, the couple began dreaming about leaving Yucca Valley so they could start their new lives together with a clean slate.
They had this big idea of leaving the past behind, just being in love, being together.
But while Kimberly and Jimmy worked on their plans to leave Yucca Valley behind, local police were closing in on a murder suspect. On the evening of January 26, 2004, police had discovered a gruesome triple murder inside the home of suspected drug dealer Patty Crevassier. The victims included Patty, along with two carpet installers, Ward Phillips and William Landers.
It was a pretty grisly scene.
Less than 24 hours later, with the help of contacts within the drug trade, detectives had already ID'd a possible suspect. 37-year-old biker and known drug user, Mark Jenkins.
He went by the name Motorhead. He was tied up in the drug community very deeply, in and out of prison.
He was a hot.
Mark had a major beef with Patty.
Mark and his girlfriend were friends with Patty. They actually knew her. And Patty and Mark's girlfriend, at some point, had a falling out. And it escalated to a full-blown fight.
The police were called, and Mark's girlfriend ended up going to jail. And while the fight hadn't landed Patty behind bars, Mark made sure he let everyone in the local drug community know that he wasn't going to let her go unpunished.
He was going to get back at her. He was going to get her.
Investigators immediately tracked Mark down and brought him in for questioning. When asked if he had ever threatened Patty Crevassier, Mark admitted he had, but he insisted he had nothing to do with her death or the murders of Ward Phillips or William Landers.
He acknowledged that he was upset at Patty, but he denied any involvement in the crime.
But Mark was able to offer more than just denials. He had an alibi for the night the murders took place. An alibi that, to the detective's surprise, checked out.
He had a good alibi, and we were able to prove that he was not there anytime during the evening or during any time we knew this happened.
With their only suspect in the clear, investigators were back to square one. They decided to turn back to the only other lead they had yet to explore. The dark-colored Chevy Silverado Patty's friend had seen at the house.
We'd let the local deputies in the area know that we were looking for a dark-colored Chevy with Michigan plates.
But as police waited for information to come in on the pickup truck, they got a call from a man who claimed he had information about the murders.
The gentleman on the line identified himself as Joe Mashad.
It was the same Joe Mashad who was the estranged husband of 29-year-old Kimberly Mashad. Joe told police that he received an unexpected phone call from Kimberly. She told him that she and Jimmy had just left Yucca Valley and were moving to Washington State. They just stopped at a gas station on their way. Jimmy had gone inside, which gave Kimberly a chance to call her estranged husband and share the news. According to Kimberly, the couple's decision to move had been spur of the moment, and they hadn't taken the kids with them. So she needed Joe to look after them.
I couldn't come get my kids. I was worried for my kids.
But Joe could tell by the tremor in Kimberly's voice that something else was bothering her besides her children's well-being.
Joseph can tell instantly that something is wrong with her and that she has a secret that she's keeping.
Joe said he prodded Kimberly to tell him what was bothering her. That's when Kimberly admitted something he never expected.
She admitted to Joe that she and her new boyfriend Jimmy were involved in the triple homicide at Yucca Valley.
I told him that Jim had just killed 3 people.
That's why they needed to get out of town.
Police assumed the murders Kimberly confessed to were the 3 killings at Patty Crevassier's house. It was a hunch that seemed to be confirmed when Joe described the vehicle that Kimberly and Jimmy had been driving when they left for Washington.
Kimberly Michaud had a dark-colored Chevy pickup truck, and they had Michigan plates.
Kimberly's vehicle is an exact match to the one that Patty's friends described seeing at the house on the day of the murders.
Investigators alerted police across the state to be on the lookout for the couple and their truck as they headed north. In the meantime, detectives began interviewing the couple's friends and neighbors, and while none of them had been in recent contact with Kimberly or Jimmy, they did have some interesting information about the couple, including a possible connection they might have to Patty Crevassier.
It became apparent to police very quickly the drugs were involved in this case, and that there weren't just drugs that were allegedly being sold, but drugs that were being used, specifically by Kimberly and by Jimmy.
According to the friends, Jimmy had been using drugs since he got out of prison, and both he and Kimberly began smoking pot together at the beginning of their affair. But it wasn't long before Jimmy turned Kimberly onto more dangerous and addictive drugs.
Together they end up using methamphetamine together.
If they were as heavy drug users as their neighbors suggested, it certainly seemed likely that they'd been customers of Patty Crevassier at some point.
Yucca Valley wasn't that big of a town. If you wanted smack or meth, you were most likely going to buy it from Patty.
The couple's drug use, however, didn't explain why the couple would want to kill Patty, or Ward Phillips or William Landers for that matter. But while their motives weren't entirely clear, the couple's potential for violence was. In looking into Jimmy Kelly's background, detectives learned he was a member of the Aryan Brotherhood, a dangerous prison gang he had joined while serving time for vehicular. Initially agreed to go along with the plan, and the couple made arrangements to meet Patty at her house under the guise of buying more drugs. But when the couple showed up, they quickly realized Patty wasn't alone.
There are 3 people in the house where they expected 1, and they're basically outnumbered. Kimberly is thinking, this really isn't a great idea to move forward. We should probably abandon the plan. Not so for Jimmy.
Kimberly told police that Jimmy wasn't fazed by the presence of the 2 men, and no sooner had Patty invited the couple inside than Jimmy leapt into action.
He told her, give me all your drugs, all your money now, or I'm gonna kill you.
But rather than comply with Jimmy's orders, Kimberly claimed that Patty responded with a reply they weren't expecting.
Patty makes some statement to him that she doesn't have any money.
She said she just gave all her money to her drug dealer.
But as Patty tried to explain that she didn't have what the couple was looking for, Ward Phillips made a sudden move.
Ward actually rushes Jimmy, but Jimmy saw him coming and turned his gun on him.
Jimmy Kelly actually shot him in the leg.
And according to Kimberly, once the first shot was fired, chaos ensued.
William Landers starts to attack Jimmy Kelly and put a stop to this. And Jimmy Kelly shoots Landers twice in the face.
Kelly just started shooting. Had a 25 automatic and just started shooting.
I remember yelling at him to stop, and it was like he was looking at me, but he wasn't there. He wasn't fully there. Like he could hear me, but it's like it wasn't him. It wasn't Jim. It wasn't the Jim I knew.
When Jimmy was done firing, Ward Phillips and William Landers lay dead on the floor, and both Kimberly and Patty were left shocked.
I had never seen that side of him. I wasn't sure what to expect, what to think. I was frantic.
But before Kimberly could voice her protest, Patty Crevassier suddenly changed her story.
Patty is now obviously distraught, clearly concerned for her safety, and she then tells Jimmy and Kimberly that she has a little bit of money that she had in her bedroom.
Jimmy ordered Kimberly to take Patty even into the back and find whatever money they could, and Kimberly came back out with a $20 bill and some change, like a coin jar, and that's all they had.
It was a far smaller payoff than Jimmy had hoped for. Seeing his disappointment and anger, Patty dropped to her knees and begged for mercy. But according to Kimberly, her pleas fell on deaf ears.
Jimmy Kelly shoves her face down into the carpet and then shoots her twice in the head.
No sooner was Patty dead than there was a knock at the door. Fearful Jimmy might kill whoever was on the other side, Kimberly acted fast.
I remember he told me to tell them that Patty's busy.
Once the visitors left, Kimberly said that Jimmy ordered her to clean up the scene. Not wanting to draw Jimmy's anger on her, Kimberly said she followed his orders, but was soon horrified to realize his reign of terror wasn't over.
He took a box cutter and cut Ward Phillips' throat, and then he took a carpet knife and cut William Landers' throat. He then walked over to Patty and took an electrical extension cord and was trying to wrap it around her neck.
I didn't know physically what he was doing. I was looking out the window.
Finally assured that all three victims were dead, Jimmy ordered Kimberly to the pickup truck, where they made off with $60 in change.
Kimberly says at this point there was nothing she could do. Jimmy had a gun, and she was in fear for her safety.
I knew that Jim had done something wrong, and I had been there. It was wrong. I was scared. Feelings and emotions I never want to go through ever in my life. This is the first time I've ever spoken of it or talked about it with anybody.
Investigators were stunned by Kimberly's statement. But were her claims of innocence true? Had she really been caught off guard by Jimmy's murderous rampage? Or had she been an equal conspirator in the massacre and was now trying to place all the blame on her partner in crime? There was only one way for police to find out.
They needed to talk to Jimmy and to get his side of the story.
Coming up, Jimmy reveals his version of what happened in Patty Crevassier's house and casts doubt on Kimberly's claim of being an innocent bystander.
They both knew going to the location that night that they were going to rob and kill Patty and anybody else who was in the house.
And the couple's fate is determined in court, where a last-minute twist is unveiled that no one...
I still have nightmares of it.
When lonely and bored housewife Kimberly Michaud left Jimmy Kelly, she thought she'd found the exciting and passionate bad boy of her dreams. But 5 months later, both Kimberly and Jimmy were in police custody for the savage triple slaying of drug dealer Patty Crevassier in Yucca Valley, California, along with 2 carpet installers who were working at Patty's house, Ward Phillips and William Landers.
They targeted Patty because she had drugs and money. Ward and William were just innocent victims who happened to be in the wrong place at the wrong time.
But when questioned by police, Kimberly insisted she had no idea Jimmy was going to turn the robbery into a bloodbath.
Kimberly blamed the killings on Jimmy and basically made it seem that she was more of a hostage than a co-conspirator.
Was Kimberly telling the truth? To find out, detectives sat down with Jimmy Kelly. And when he found out what Kimberly had told them, he surprised investigators by admitting it was all true.
He said Kimberly never had anything to do with this. This was all me.
He backed up Kimberly's story and he defended her and said that she had nothing to do with this, that she wasn't a part of this in any way, she didn't harm anyone, and that she should be released.
But while Jimmy's confession at first seemed to line up with Kimberly's story, there was one detail that was noticeably different. Jimmy claimed that while he had pulled the trigger, the murders weren't something that happened in the heat of the moment. Instead, the murders had been a part of his plan all along, a plan that Kimberly knew about.
Kimberly knew going in that they had planned to rob and kill anybody that was there prior to going over there.
Eventually, he does confess the idea that he did tell Kimberly he was going to have to kill them all because they'd be witnesses. And so they both knew going to the location that night that they were going to rob and kill Patty and anybody else who was in the house.
It was enough for authorities to charge both Jimmy and Kimberly with 3 counts of premeditated murder.
Police told us that, both of us, that we were going to jail for murdering 3 people. They said a lot of things that scared me. I was gonna lose my kids. I was gonna spend the rest of my life in prison.
But since Kimberly never pulled a trigger, prosecutors were worried a jury might not convict her of first-degree murder. So rather than take her case to trial, prosecutors offered her a deal.
She was offered a deal by the DA, and she pled out to voluntary manslaughter. They were going to give her 8 years.
With Kimberly's fate sealed, it was Jimmy Kelly's turn in court. Rather than go to trial, he pled guilty to all charges. And when it came time for his sentencing, he stunned everyone when the judge allowed him to address the court.
He actually faced the jury and said, you know, if it was me, if I was in your position, I would give me the death penalty.
And that's just what the jury did.
Because there were 3 killings, he received a death sentence as to each one of those. And so he is serving a death sentence at San Quentin.
In 2011, Kimberly was released from prison on parole after serving a little less than 7 years of her 8-year sentence. Today, she's still trying to piece her life together and answer a question that's still on many people's minds. How a small-town mother of 4 could have fallen under the spell of such a violent and dangerous man.
This would be with me for the rest of my life because all I wanted was my happiness. I wanted my white picket fence, my prince. That's not reality. That's not real life. I'm sorry to all the families. It's something you want to forget. I still have nightmares of it.
Their crime made headlines around the world.
They're called the Craigslist Killers.
Not only because of the brutality of their actions,
The cause of death was determined to be multiple stab wounds.
but for the twisted romance that they claimed drove them to kill.
They wanted to murder somebody together.
Now get an insider's look at this deadly love story. Hear firsthand accounts about what drove this lovesick young man desperate for attention.
And he told me he loved her as the girl he wanted to be with.
And a wayward young woman with a disturbing past.
She was telling us about stabbing this guy, just like you and I are talking right now.
But this diabolical tale of murder and deceit didn't end with the couple's arrest. In fact, it was only just the beginning. And what detectives ultimately unveiled not only stunned authorities, it shocked the entire world.
She says, yeah, I killed 22 people.
This case is so bizarre.
investigators that whoever did this, it had been personal, which left them wondering just who was this man and who could have hated him enough to kill him so brutally.
Whoever wanted this man dead wanted him really, really dead.
North Pole, Alaska, a town whose name evokes the warm and blissful feelings of Christmas time. But for young Miranda Dean, growing up in North Pole had been anything but blissful. The youngest of two daughters, Miranda was born with dislocated hips, a condition that confined her to a body cast from age 2 to 4.
She had a little rough start in life. I had to put a diaper inside the body cast, put a diaper outside the body cast. I had to blow dry her because she would sweat on cool air. Miranda was 24-hour care.
For a break, her parents would sometimes send her and her sister to stay with her aunt and uncle on the weekends. But what the rest of the family didn't know was that every time the lights went out, her uncle came into Miranda's room and sexually molested both Miranda and her 5-year-old sister.
Miranda suffered horrific abuse at the hands of her uncle.
Miranda and her sister eventually told her parents and aunt about the abuse a few months after it began. Their uncle was arrested and sentenced to 19 years in prison.
I thought I could deal with anything in my life except for that. Not only did I know that that was a horrible thing to go through, but for my children, because I tried to protect them their entire lives, it was hard. It was very hard.
Miranda's family tried to help her and her sister recover, but the intense trauma remained. Growing up, she had trouble adjusting in school, and by the time Miranda was 12 years old, the scars from her abuse began to manifest in dangerous ways.
She was running away a lot, and she was running away to numb her feelings and her pain. Going to parties, getting drunk, doing drugs.
When her parents found out about her drug abuse, they tried to step in, sending her to drug rehab facilities. But each time she came back, it didn't take long for her to start using again.
She would come home, she would do really well for like a couple weeks, and she would go right back into the same thing again.
By age 13, she was only marginally attending school and didn't spend much time with others her own age. Instead, Miranda fell in with a gang of 19 and 20-year-old boys who began using the young teenager for sex.
She's getting passed around from gang member to use for whatever sexual fantasy they want to fulfill.
I didn't know what was going on at the time, during that time, until I read her journal.
Over the next 3 years, Miranda frequently ran away from home to live with different gang members for weeks at a time. Then, at 16, Miranda became pregnant with one of the gang members' children. Miranda claimed it was a wake-up call that convinced her to finally turn her life around.
She had done a lot of bad things at that point, and I think she wanted to get out. Miranda said, I want to kind of change my life.
To help Miranda get away from her troubled life in Alaska, her mother sent her to live with relatives in Coates, North Carolina, where she gave birth to a little girl. To provide for her daughter the best life she could, Miranda cleaned up her act.
She was working in a supermarket. She had gotten her GED. Her number one priority was to make sure that her child was safe at all times and raised properly.
And it wasn't long after she arrived in town that she met a man who would not only help her heal the wounds of her past, but also change her life in ways she never could imagine. 22-year-old Elliot Barber. Like Miranda, Elliot Barber was a young man struggling to work through his own problems. Growing up, Elliot hadn't fit in very well either.
He was very shy, he was a little bit awkward. He wasn't the most popular guy in high school.
Elliot may not have been very popular in high school, but unlike Miranda, he had been an excellent student. He was also obsessed with the paranormal and the occult.
He was very interested in religion, angels and demons, the supernatural, things like that.
In college, Elliot decided to turn those interests into a degree in religious studies. But his plans for the future were unexpectedly derailed when his college girlfriend got pregnant and had a baby when Elliot,
Cause of death was determined to be multiple stab wounds.
person Troy texted that night, her attitude completely changed, especially when police told her they were confiscating her cell phone.
She went from very nice and pleasant to off a cliff nasty in a heartbeat. Had to forcibly take her cell phone from her hand.
To detectives, Miranda's sudden outburst was a serious red flag. It was clear she was hiding something. But was she afraid her phone would reveal her as the killer? Or was she desperately trying to cover for someone else? Coming up, police unlock Miranda's phone and uncover a sordid tale of lust and conspiracy.
It was very clear through the text messaging that this was about sex.
But just when they think they're closing in on a suspect, a surprise confession takes the investigation in a completely new direction and unveils a shocking motive almost too disturbing to believe.
Everyone was calling and everyone wanted to know about the Craigslist killer.
Miranda and Elliot Barber fell in love in the spring of 2013. After just 6 months of dating, the couple married and moved with Miranda's daughter to Selinsgrove, Pennsylvania, a move that caught Miranda's family by surprise.
I did not find out until after they moved that they were married. And they just up and moved, and I didn't know why. I was shocked.
But in early November, while Elliot and Miranda were adjusting to life in Selinsgrove, local police were in the middle of a gruesome homicide investigation. 42-year-old Troy LaFerrera had been found stabbed to death and dumped on a city street. Phone records had revealed that Miranda was the last person Troy had contacted on his cell phone. But when investigators initially questioned Miranda, she claimed she didn't know Troy.
We talked to her for upwards of 2 hours, and she denied having any involvement with the homicide.
But when officers confiscated Miranda's phone, she suddenly became furious. And the unexpected personality shift raised a serious red flag with investigators.
We saw a whole different side to Miranda Barber. You know, this person goes from cool, calm, collect to, F the police.
Eager to find out exactly what Miranda might be hiding, investigators persuaded her to calm down and continue her interview, where they pressed her on exactly why Troy's phone had records of texting her the night of his death. After taking a moment to regain her composure, Miranda admitted she hadn't been entirely truthful about her relationship with the victim.
She said she had been texting with an individual but didn't know who the individual was. She never met that person.
Miranda told police that ever since she and Elliot moved to Pennsylvania, she'd been advertising on Craigslist as a companion for lonely men. But Miranda insisted that it wasn't for sex. Instead, she explained that she provided a different kind of service.
It's not about sex, and it's not about drugs. It's about delightful conversation for people who don't have that in their lives. And she makes anywhere from $100 to $850 a night.
Miranda claimed that Elliot knew all about her side job and was fine with it. He especially liked the extra spending money it brought in, which is why they were both excited when she was contacted by a potential new client through her Craigslist ad on his birthday. Miranda said she didn't know the client, but they'd agreed to meet that night at a local mall. But Miranda claimed she never met the man. Apparently, she'd gotten too nervous about meeting this particular client and decided to leave before he ever showed up.
She got scared throughout the texting, and then she left the area and went and picked her husband up, and they went out for basically a night on the town at that point.
When investigators questioned Elliot, he confirmed Miranda's story, telling police that he knew about her side business on Craigslist and sometimes even drove her to her dates.
He was aware of Miranda's dealings on Craigslist, having delightful conversations with guys.
Investigators found the barber's story both odd and suspicious. In their experience, no one paid the kind of money Miranda was talking about just to talk. And when they finally got a look at the text messages themselves, it was pretty clear that Troy had been expecting a lot more than conversation from Miranda.
But it was very clear through the text messaging as well that this was about sex. They were talking about how much money would be exchanged, what she would do in exchange for that money.
Relationship with Troy convinced detectives more than ever that she was holding back information that could be crucial to solving his murder, but they knew that proving it would be difficult. Finally, on November 13th, investigators caught the break they were looking for. Officers found Troy LaFerrera's missing truck parked at the local shopping mall. They were unable to find any evidence of foul play inside the vehicle, but they were able to acquire surveillance footage of the parking lot from the night Troy was murdered.
They were able to go back, get the time that the victim's vehicle came in, and start watching to see what happened.
Sure enough, the security cameras showed Troy's truck pull into the mall's parking lot, where he then got into a vehicle driven by someone else. But the video was too grainy to see who was driving the second vehicle, or make out any further details like the car's make or model.
We couldn't get a license plate. It was too far from that, but we did see the victim park his vehicle and get into another vehicle.
But while the security camera didn't get a clear view of the mall parking lot, a second camera from a nearby store captured footage of the same mysterious vehicle from later that same night, and a clear view of who was inside.
It showed Mr. Barber getting out of the rear seat of the vehicle.
From the video, police couldn't tell if Troy was still seated in the passenger seat of the car, but it did show Elliot walk into the store, and cameras inside revealed him making a telling purchase.
Then inside the store, we saw Mr. Barber going up and down certain aisles, picking up cleaning supplies.
Was Elliot picking up supplies to clean up the crime scene? Police didn't know for sure, but the timestamp on the video indicated Elliot entered the store almost 2 hours after Troy's car was seen arriving at the mall parking lot. The same time that both Elliot and Miranda claimed they were in Harrisburg celebrating his birthday.
It's clear they lied to police. But there wasn't enough evidence to arrest either one of them.
But detectives were able to convince a judge that there was reason to suspect the Barber's vehicle, at the very least, had been involved in Troy's murder. When a forensic team examined the vehicle, they found that the interior had been recently cleaned, most likely with the cleaning products Elliot purchased the night of the crime. But a closer inspection revealed whoever cleaned the vehicle hadn't done a very thorough job.
There was large amounts of blood under the passenger seat.
With blood samples collected from the car and on their way to the lab, it looked like detectives were on the cusp of tying Elliot and Miranda to the crime. But it turned out they wouldn't have to wait for the lab results. That evening, they received word that one of the Barbers wanted to come clean about what actually happened the night Troy LaFerrera disappeared.
I was called at home, stating that Miranda had returned to the barracks.
I'm very tired. I'm very exhausted, but this is very necessary.
It's 5,000 pounds of weight on your shoulders.
But little did police know that the secrets Miranda was about to reveal were far more disturbing than anything they were prepared for, and only cast the case further into mystery.
I'm shocked. It's like everything I knew up till this point was just a lie.
Coming up, Miranda Barber unveils a harrowing story of violence and revenge.
Attack me.
But Elliot Barber has his own story to tell, and what he reveals will make police reconsider everything they thought they knew about the crime.
They wanted to murder somebody. Together.
struggling to overcome the trauma of childhood sexual abuse. And when she married Elliot Barber in 2013, it seemed like she'd gotten a chance to start over. But the investigation into the murder of Troy LaFerrera revealed he'd solicited Miranda for sex through Craigslist on the night he'd been killed. And when police found blood underneath the seat of Miranda's vehicle, they began to believe that both Miranda and her husband were behind the brutal killing.
They apparently cleaned the surfaces, but didn't get underneath. And the seat was soaked pretty well with blood.
But before lab tests could even confirm whether the blood in fact belonged to the victim, Miranda approached detectives on her own volition and offered to tell them everything she knew about what died.
She knew that the police were going to come for her eventually, and she wanted to get it over with.
Sitting down with detectives, Miranda shockingly admitted to killing Troy LaFerrera. But she claimed her actions had been an act of desperate self-defense.
She says, yes, I killed this man, but it was because I was in fear for my life. I was just protecting myself.
According to Miranda, it all started earlier that same night, when Troy responded to her Craigslist ad for companionship. She claimed she and Elliot were running low on funds, and she was excited by the opportunity to make some fast cash.
Me and my husband had planned to go out later that night, but we didn't have exactly enough money. I told him that I had an opportunity to get money for that.
She made an appointment to meet him at the local shopping mall at 8 o'clock that night. Miranda said she arrived first. Troy got there a few minutes later, and upon arrival, he got into her car and instructed her to drive.
Everything seemed fine, and we were just driving. And I think he just told me to pull over and to parallel park at this place.
Miranda said she and Troy talked for a little while, but things quickly turned south when Troy put his hands between her legs. Hoping to persuade him to stop, Miranda said she told him she was only 16. But she claimed Troy only became more aggressive.
Everything just completely flipped upside down. I didn't know what to do. He just attacked me.
Miranda said her mind flashed back to the sexual abuse she'd suffered as a child. And on instinct, she grabbed a knife she kept hidden under her seat for protection. As for what happened next, Miranda said she couldn't remember.
Everything kind of just went black.
But when she finally snapped back to reality, she realized she was stabbing Troy repeatedly with her knife.
She said she was instinctively fighting for her life. She had no idea how many times she stabbed him. She only stopped when he stopped attacking her, and he slumped over in the passenger seat of the car.
She got out, walked around to the far side, opened the door. He was already slumped against the door, so he fell out. She shut the door, got in.
Miranda told police she drove back home in shock and told Elliot what happened. Elliot agreed to keep it a secret and cleaned up the car out of love for her. Afterwards, they had gone to Harrisburg to celebrate Elliot's birthday like nothing had happened. For detectives, listening to Miranda describe the killing in such cold terms was shocking.
She was telling us about stabbing this guy just like you and I are talking right now. Just like it's an everyday thing.
But as shocking as Miranda's story was, police still weren't buying it. And Troy's size by herself.
They still didn't understand how this small, framed woman could have done what she said she did. They believed that there was more to the story than she was indicating because it just did not make sense.
Investigators also knew something about the case Miranda did not. Detectives decided early on to hold back on one important detail from the crime scene in order to weed out any false information from potential witnesses.
One of the items that we found at the crime scene was a cable cord. And it's one of the things that we kept out of the media.
Bruises on Troy's throat indicated he hadn't simply died from stab wounds. He'd also been strangled. A detail Miranda hadn't included in her story. Detectives ran the part number printed on the cable and quickly found the store where it had been purchased.
Officer Bremingen called over and they were able to say, yep, this was purchased on this day at this time, and here's the video.
When investigators watched the footage, they were able to see who purchased the cable. Elliot Barber.
We're able to see Elliot Barber picking out the length of cable cord, having it cut, and testing it to see how strong it was and how it felt, wrapping it around his hands.
If Elliot purchased the cable, it most likely meant he'd been the one who strangled Troy to death. To detectives, it made sense, as it was much easier to picture Elliot having the strength to kill a man Troy LaFerrera's size by himself. But if Elliot had killed Troy, what was his motive? And why was his wife trying to cover for him by taking credit for the murder? To get to the bottom of things, detectives knew they needed to talk to Elliot himself, but they wouldn't have to go looking for him. Just like Miranda had earlier that day, detectives learned that Elliot turned himself over to police.
Elliot Barber, he ultimately came to the police station to speak to police about what had happened.
Unsure of what Miranda had revealed in her own confession, Elliot told detectives that he wanted to come clean about what actually happened the night Troy LaFerrera died. But Elliot's version of events was quite different from Miranda's. According to Elliot, Troy's death hadn't been in self-defense. It was a premeditated murder.
They wanted to murder somebody together, and it was just a matter of choosing the right victim and when they were going to do it.
Elliot told detectives that he'd always admired Miranda's strength and determination, especially considering how she'd overcome her abusive past. But not long after they got married, Miranda confessed that there was more to her troubled background than just sex and drug abuse. She claimed that while she was a teenager in Alaska, she became part of a violent street gang, and as part of this gang, she also killed a number of people.
She said that she had killed people before and that she enjoyed it, that she really got a thrill out of killing.
But instead of being horrified by Miranda's revelation, Elliot claimed he was fascinated. In his eyes, it made Miranda even more alluring and even powerful.
If you had a spouse and she had told you that she has killed many people, at that point you think that you would turn around and say, there's something wrong here, or you're crazy. And he didn't either one of those and decided to accept that and embrace that.
Elliot said he wanted to experience the same thrill and exhilaration Miranda claimed she felt when killing another person. And to make that happen, Elliot said he and Miranda decided they would kill someone together.
He wanted to be like she was, and they wanted to do this together as a couple, as something special for a couple to do.
It was unimaginable to me as I was listening to the statement. I kept thinking, how could this be? Who bonds by killing someone?
Elliot said the couple decided to use Miranda's Craigslist ad to lure potential victims. And once they targeted Troy LaFerrera, they came up with a plan where Elliot would hide under a blanket.
This case was so bizarre.
Coming up, facing the death penalty, Miranda and Elliot Barber make a startling decision.
That was a roll of the dice that they just didn't want to take.
In the meantime, investigators had discovered a satanic Bible hidden in the newlyweds' nightstand.
You had the husband and wanting to kill somebody together and then throw in their satanic stuff. This case was so bizarre.
When confronted, Miranda told authorities she'd been practicing Satanism since she was 13 years old, and that the gang she joined as a young girl while living in Alaska had actually been a devil-worshipping cult. But that wasn't the only shocking revelation Miranda made to police. Miranda confirmed what her husband had told police. Troy LaFerrera had not been her first murder victim.
She says, yeah, I killed 22 people.
In fact, Miranda claimed she'd killed at least 22 victims, and that the actual number might be much higher. According to Miranda, her killing spree began not long after she joined the satanic cult. She claimed she targeted victims who she described as bad people, Men who she suspected were sexual predators and reminded her of the uncle who abused her as a young child.
Miranda suffered horrendous abuse and then placed herself in the role of a superhero. She called herself Super Miranda, who was ridding the world of pedophiles and trash.
But when Sunbury police contacted law enforcement in Alaska, they were unable to come up with any homicides that fit her descriptions. To many, Miranda's claims seemed like fabrications, designed to make it easier for the 19-year-old to claim insanity and avoid the death penalty.
I don't think there's an 18-year-old in this world who has the wherewithal to get away with killing 22 people. You gotta think you're trying to garner attention here.
Do you think she's lying that she killed 22 people?
I didn't say that.
Do you think she's telling the truth?
Well, don't put words in my mouth.
Regardless of Miranda's intentions, the court could only rule on the one murder she and her husband had been charged with. On September 18, 2014, the Barbers both pled guilty to Troy LaFerrera's murder and were sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole.
I was glad that she didn't try to blame it on somebody else or try to hide it, but she owned up to it. But just heartbroken that she did do it.
But despite the Barbers' convictions, many mysteries still surround the case. Mainly whether Miranda's claims of serial murder were true. And how did Elliot, who at one point in his life seemed to have great potential, fall so easily under Miranda's deranged and deadly spell?
It's much scarier to have murderers that are out there doing it for the joy of it. Actually come into contact with two people like that in our small corner of the world is it's frightening.
Gazing at the stars in the velvet sky, lost in memories of a time gone by. Melodies of the past played in my mind, whispers of the wind slowing down time. Let the music surround us, take us away to a sweeter place where memories stay. In this world of dreams, we will find a little piece of soul in the music that binds, painting pictures in the colors of sound. Echoes of the heart softly resound, lost in the rhythm